Okay, well, it looks like we're live on Google Hangouts Live for the next episode of The Need to Know. This is a small little web series here in Florida MUFON chapter where we're taking from our witness stashes and new witnesses and including some of our own field investigators who are trained observers and or insiders, people that have been either part of military outfits, that have been part of incidences that have occurred in history or current. And these are the kinds of people that want to come forward and tell their story. And and this is a special case. The Miami incident, the 1967 Miami incident. Bill Schroeder is actually one of our field investigators, our state section director of Tampa Bay, and he's got a very unique historical case of significance, where a lot of different things have happened. A lot of witnesses were there, and he's right now working on the project to gather the investigative information, including additional witnesses. Hopefully, he can find those people, and we're going to do what we can to help him. And tonight, he's going to be talking about his case. Now, if you're watching this pre-recorded, just understand that this is live for us, so it's not like the previous episode that was edited, so it was prettier and probably moved a little bit smoother, so there might be a few hiccups. But bear with us, and but we'll go ahead and get started. And what Bill's going to do is pretty much introduce himself. He's got quite a bit of a background, and he's really working on this incident that occurred in Miami in 1967. I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Bill, and then at the end we'll pick it up and have a little conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. Yeah, my name is Bill Schroeder. I am a MUFON State Section Director for Tampa Bay and retired police officer and private investigator. And before all that, I was in the United States Army. Spent this first part of my career with the Hawk missile battalions in the RADCOM, Army Air Defense Command. Back in 1967, we were in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and relations between us and Cuba and us and the USSR were very seriously bad. So there was the Hawk or Hercules missile batteries around almost every major city, and every power installation, everything that needed to be protected. The Air Force was the only one there. The United States Army had missile batteries all over the place. Fortunately, my cousin, who I grew up with and was more like a brother than a cousin, was in the United States Air Force. And he was in the 644th Radar Squadron up in Homestead, Florida, just outside of Miami. He was radar air warning and command center for southeastern United States. We were both really part of NORAD. At that time, it was North American Air Defense Command. It's now the Aerospace Defense Command, and part of the United States defense system. Naturally, my main interest was protecting airspace of southeast Florida from people coming in from Cuba. If something took off in Cuba, we knew the minute it had its wheels up. So, next slide there, Morgan, please.
Okay. One second, and there you go.
And this guy, I don't know who he is. this is me back in 1967. I looked a little better then, and there's some of my creds, And next one, please.
Mm-hmm.
This is Dennis, my cousin. Dennis was a communication center specialist. He also done part-time on the scopes. Most of the military has cross-training. If you're in a particular location or a base that has multiple tasks, you usually learn all the tasks. And he was in communications, but he did work on the scopes. He was what we love to call in the business a scope dope part-time. Go ahead. This is my baby. This is the Hawk, which stands for Homing All the Way Killer. 1,200 pounds, 16 feet, and it'll do Mach 2.5, and it fires like a rifle bullet. It's almost at Mach 2 when the tail fins clear that launcher. It's almost at Mach 2. So that gives you an idea how fast that little devil is going. Vicious little weapon, still used all over the world, and Japan just bought 265 of them to counter the threat from China. Next. This is the DEW line. This is the distant early warning line that was in effect back during the Cold War. The closest distance between us and Russia was over the North Pole. Anything coming over the North Pole was considered hostile until it was positively identified. The DEW line was a picket line of United States and Canadian radar stations, along with picket ships out in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It was essentially a air defense net, a fence to protect this. Targets that came over the DEW line were classified as snowbirds, and back then, snowbirds weren't people that came to Florida bringing money. Snowbirds were Russian bear bombers bringing bad stuff. Go ahead. This is the 644th Radar Squadron as it looked back in 1967. The white building on your left is the command center where Dennis was with his radar screens. The large bubble is a pulse acquisition radar long-range unit. They also had height finders there. They're outside the picture. Go ahead. This is B battery, 6th to the 65th, and by the cars you can tell this is back in 1967. In the distance you can see one of the batteries sections. There's 3 launchers in each section, 3 birds on each launcher, and there's 3 more launchers that you can't see off the screen. On the left side there on the tower is the illuminator radar, the one that got me in so much trouble. Go ahead. This is my baby. This is a pulse acquisition radar. I was a pulse acquisition mechanic. I worked on this radar every day, and then also sat in the BCC and took my turns as a scope dope. I was a fire control and maintenance. Go ahead. This is the BCC, and position like 16 is exactly where I was setting, much like I'm setting tonight. Headset on, feet up in the other chair, and Dennis and I were on the NORAD defense net, but we weren't talking about defense. We were chatting with each other, and we also had several nurses from a local nursing college up in Miami on the line, and we were doing our best to do our best. Go ahead. This is the inside of the BCC, thanks to a friend in Germany where the Hawk is still used. This was sent to me. You won't see many pictures of the inside of the BCC. It's still considered, parts that are still considered secret, but this is okay. The 2 scopes in the far side there, I would have been on the right scope. The scope that's closest to the view here, the big one, is the command scope, which usually is manned by an officer during a hot mission. Good. And that's the high power illuminator radar. You'll hear me talking about that later. That's actually a very, very narrow beam radar that's extremely powerful. The easy way to check it would be just to throw steel wool up in front of it and watch the steel wool vaporize. I actually watched the illuminator when it was in full power. Seagulls would fly in front of it, and unfortunately they would meet their demise. The RF would just fry them. Go ahead. Okay, on the night in question, Dennis and I were, as I said, chatting, and Dennis said, I've got to leave. I've got something going on. I'll be back in just a minute. So he He put me on hold. He cut off the nurses we were talking to, and I was not surprised because Dennis would have to do things from time to time, and he'd have to do some work, and we couldn't talk. He came back on the line and said, "You won't believe this. Listen, I'm going to cut you into the NORAD net." And he said, "Don't say anything, but listen to what's going on." Dennis coming into the NORAD net, which wasn't a violation or anything because I was part of NORAD. It just wasn't hot that night, and there was all sorts of chatter about snowbirds and unidentified targets that were approaching southern Florida along the Atlantic coast at an extremely high speed. Dennis advised that they were as they approached Miami, like in the Fort Lauderdale area, they had to begin decelerating. They had them on their scopes, and I was in standby power, but all I had to do was flip the switch on my pulse acquisition radar to bring up my radar. So as I listened to the chatter, I flipped the switch on my PAR, and there they were. And he said, "We have 4 targets." I said, "Roger, we have 4 targets. I have 4 targets also." Now, here's what Dennis and I just didn't realize till recently. The 4 targets that he was tracking, which we eventually became Flight A, we named them that so we could keep track of which was which, and the 4 targets that I was tracking, which we named Flight B, were 2 separate groups. So we had 2 groups of 4 bogies operating in South Florida, inside of our radar range. There may have been others, we'll never know. And initially, the minute I picked them up, it was clear that these bogies were flying some type of a search grid. They were fly from the Keys across to the Everglades National Park, out into the Gulf of Mexico, do a sharp turn, and then come back in the same direction. They were flying a grid pattern, no doubt about it. I've seen the Coast Guard and the Air Force do it on many occasions. As I watched them, I challenged them for identification, friend or foe. Nothing. Their signal was strong. These were valid targets. This wasn't temperature inversion. This wasn't running rabbits. None of the radar anomalies that I had ever seen. I knew it wasn't spoofing. That's the advantage that I had on this one. I had time to sit there and go through what they could have been and what they weren't. At the same time, Dennis also said his group was flying a grid also. Seemed to be going from like close to Opelika in Fort Lauderdale, down towards North Miami, out to sea, then back again. As we were sitting there, we'd probably been a few minutes, I saw 4 fast movers lift off from Boca Chica Naval Air Station, which was just 4 or 5 miles from my location. I'll never know what they were, but I'm sure they were United States Marine or Navy Phantom fighters. They were supersonic, headed north. As they got over the water in the Gulf of Mexico, the targets absolutely just disappeared off my scope between sweeps. I told Dennis, I said, my targets are gone. They're disappeared. They've gone off the scope. And he said, our targets are gone also. Then the Phantoms remained in the area as long as they could. I don't know if they ever got a radar track. They were on a completely different frequency from us, and headed home. When they headed home, the minute that they got about 35 miles from Boca Chica on the return leg, the targets returned in the same way they left, between sweeps. This went on for 3 hours, and I was very frustrated because on my side I not only had the pulse acquisition radar, I had several other tools at my disposal, including my illuminator, the high power illuminator that I told you about earlier. And they were just out of my range. After about 3 hours, one of the bogies from Flight B broke off and started heading straight in my direction. I was very pleased about this because I was finally going to get a chance to lock on this guy and find out more information. Now, the amazing thing about the illuminator is that the return signal is so strong that when the return comes back, and it is a continuous, it's not like a pulsar. When the Doppler came back, it would often bring a subtone with it. And an experienced operator could pick out different targets by the subtone. You could hear rotary engines, you could hear turbines, you could hear jet engines. I could pick up a Bear bomber. The Bear bombers used to fly out of Cuba, and I could pick them up in a minute. So you could definitely hear those different kind of aircraft. And he got in line and brought my targeting cursor on him. I flipped my illuminator into illuminate, and for just a minute, I heard a crisp, clear return signal, beautiful Doppler shift signal, but no subtone at all. I never figured that out until recently. But the target continued over me, and then about 4 seconds after I locked on him, he hit our site with electro countermeasures. Now, I'll never figure out how he done it, but he shut down our entire site. It appeared that the polarity on our DC equipment had been reversed. I'll never know that for sure. But I do know before the scopes died, they stopped and the cursors went backwards. I've discussed this with a lot of avionics mechanics, and they can't figure it out either. They agree with me that it had to have been some kind of a polarity reversal. Naturally, our site was black. I exited the BCC. As I was going out the door, my launcher crewman, who had been out on the launch pads with the birds, my launcher sergeant ran up to me and said, "Bill, we seen him. He went right over us. It looked like a meteor, but it was flying level." And that's the last I seen of him. The next morning, we had a debriefing, and they told us that don't worry about the whole thing. It was a NORAD exercise, and just ignore it. I asked them if it would be considered top secret, and they said, no, it's not top secret. It just didn't happen. It was just an exercise. And I realized later that if they had made it top secret, that would have meant it really happened. Now, unknown to me, because I had no communication with my cousin after our site got shut down, a major and 2 or 3 gentlemen in plain clothes went into the 644th Radar Squadron and removed their film canisters. The 644th radars were filmed. They must have been, because they removed the film canisters, slapped top secret on them, and walked out the door. They told them not to say anything about it, to keep their mouths shut. Sometime later, just a month or so later, I got orders to go to Korea. I was a pulse acquisition mechanic. The military had spent a lot of money training me. I was sent to Korea and made a military police dog handler and sent to the DMZ in the middle of nowhere. Dennis was sent to Goose Bay, Labrador. They made him a disc jockey for Armed Forces Radio. Everybody that was involved in this was shipped all over the world. And the idea probably was that we would never talk about this again. Unfortunately for them, Dennis and I were like brothers. We still are. And we talked about it afterwards. Now, for 35 years, Dennis and I kind of buried this. We would see an article on the TV, or we would hear a radio report about UFOs, and Dennis would look at me, or I'd look at Dennis and say, "Do you remember the night?" And he'd say, "Yeah," and that would be it. We were so worried about violating secrecy that we didn't even talk about it between ourselves. It was always just the night. Then after we both retired, we decided to come out and make the report, and eventually led us to MUFON of Tampa Bay and MUFON of Florida, because we just needed to talk to somebody about it. And it was through MUFON that I found out about the Cuban jet that had been shot down in March of 1967. I was connected with Stanton Friedman, who had got the information about the MiG, but had taken a lot of flack because everyone told him, why would they shoot down a Russian MiG? Why would they use a death ray on a MiG-21? Well, here's what we talked for probably 2 hours, and it's my opinion that the MiG, the death of the pilot, the destruction of the MiG was collateral damage. If the MiG did in fact lock on the target, as his wingman says, he said, "I'm locking on," and that was the last transmission. His aircraft disintegrated. He may have got hit with the same ECM that hit my BCC. And the difference is that he couldn't just walk outside and say, "Holy cow." His aircraft just came apart in the sky. And from then on, it became another mountain in my life to climb. This investigation is still ongoing. I started looking for witnesses, and amazingly, they were there. I found about 2 witnesses that went to that were at the Everglades National Park in March 1967 and saw multiple disc-shaped UFOs, and their quote exactly, which was really exciting, was they looked like they were searching for something. They would fly away, they would stop, they'd go close to the water, then they'd fly somewhere else and stop. So their testimony was exactly what I was looking at on the radar. Then about a month ago, while working on another case, I found a report by a gentleman on Opelika, Florida. We didn't know it, but the incident that we witnessed was the beginning of a 1-month flap for Dade County in South Florida. Everyone was seeing UFOs all over the place. But the wonderful thing about the article in the Miami News that I found was that this guy had been watching 4 UFOs off the which would be east of Opelika, which would be out over the Atlantic and the Dade County coast, that would disappear when aircraft approached, and then when the aircraft went away, they would reappear in the exact same spot. This man was watching what Dennis and I called a flight. There's no doubt about it. What he was watching was what we were seeing on radar at the same targets that were appearing and disappearing as aircraft approached and departed. And the wonderful thing about it, the amazing thing about it is that he said that when they disappeared, they would reappear in the exact same spot, or nearly the same spot, but they were going somewhere. They were either cloaking or they were going somewhere else. And his testimony is amazing. I'm on the search for this gentleman's family. I believe he's deceased by what I could find out. And these are just some of the witnesses that are coming up. And like I said, it is an ongoing investigation. It's something I got to finish.
Indeed, and in this on the screen right now is the article, correct?
Yeah, that's it. And the section that's circled in red there that I annotated was where he says, as aircraft approached, the things just disappeared, and then when the aircraft left, they would come back in the same spot. When I read that, it was just amazing. I mean, it was just amazing. And to think that this piece of newspaper has been sitting there all those years, and I actually stumbled over it while I was working on a different case. This is a fantastic piece of information. And there was 35 or 40 other people with him, and I am now trying to find some of those people. And I think if I find one, I'll probably find many. Yeah. And this is regarding a flap in Miami that they actually had a landing at the Crestview School in Miami. And what was great was they had like 200 children and 8 or 10 teachers who watched this large UFO settle in a vacant lot about a mile away from the school and then lift off and disappear. and they come out there and told these people that it was a Coast Guard helicopter. I'm going to tell you something. If there's something that 200 kids know what it looks like, it's a Coast Guard helicopter in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Because they flew around. Opelika was the base for them. They flew all over the place. So, what can I say?
Now, when you were observing this, I mean, were they in a straight line all the time, going back and forth, or were they kind of moving, west and then up a little bit north and then back to the east?
Yeah, they would fly west and then go south maybe 25 miles, 10 miles, and then fly east to the end of the grid, then fly south 8 or 10 miles, then fly west again. They were flying a grid, no doubt about it. Nice, not a diamond formation, nice square formation, 4 solid targets. The interval between them would move a little bit back and forth, but they were flying a pretty good formation. And again, when I found that witness statement from the RV witnesses, I mean, it just was perfectly. And something about A flight and B flight. Now we named these. It was after MUFON and after we had told our story. Dennis and I sit down with a map of Florida, and we really wanted to figure out where these things were. Mm-hmm. And that's when we figured out. And you got to see, we got 2 guys on headsets in a very emotional time talking about 4 targets. What we didn't know at the time, which we finally figured out, was he was watching a different 4 targets than I was watching. So when I said I've got 4 of them, he said, "Yeah, there's 4 here." That's what we got. We were figured that out later. So we gave them each a designation so we could keep track of them, and we reconstructed this map from going back, and also from the witnesses in the RV park helped us. But based on flight lines, we reconstructed this map, and the blue star there in South Florida is where the 644th was, and the blue star over Key West is where B Battery still is. It's still there. It's a paintball range now, but it's still there.
And Flight A, did Flight A do pretty much the same characteristics as Flight B, or did it kind of stay in one? Okay.
Yes. No. Flight A was doing the same thing. They were flying a grid pattern, but afterwards, talking to Dennis, they were more of a north-south grid pattern.
I see.
And we try so hard to, I'm being an old detective, I'm a storyboard guy, and I build a storyboard, and I try to figure out what rationale, what could have happened that night. And the only thing that, and this is pure speculation on my part, but something terrible happened to one of their. This is just, again, super speculation, but something terrible may have happened to one of their comrades that night, and they came in over the North Pole and just made a beeline for South Florida, because to expose themselves like that, that big a flight, is amazing. Now, I'm beginning. I also do a lot of research for some other agencies, UFO agencies, and we're getting this. There was a big flap on that particular time around March, so they may have been doing this all over the country. This is just what we know about here. But we gave them that designation so we could keep track when we talked about them. That's how they became A and B flight.
Now about the MiGs, what can you tell us? A little bit of backstory with that.
The MiG-21 was a fantastic aircraft. It's still used by many militaries all over the world. It's a war horse of communist nations and a lot of non-communist nations. It was armed with air-to-air missiles and cannons. It had radar. It was a good fighter and a tough bird.
And do we have any knowledge of what may have happened to that pilot? Or what's your speculation on that?
The pilot of the one that locked on, he's deceased. Now his wingman, we may be on the track of, or at least someone in his command. The MiG-21's pilots were an elite group. Of course, this was 1967. The MiG-21 was a top-of-the-line aircraft, and they didn't just hand them off to anybody. The MiG pilots were an elite group. I have been able to track down one fighter pilot that was part of that part of the Cuban Air Force and was a MiG pilot back in the 60s. With Morgan's help and some other people, we're trying to track him down. I don't want to go any further with that one,
but more to come someday. So.
Yeah, more to come. If we can find him, I understand he likes to talk about the days in the Cuban Air Force, and he may really pop the cork on this one.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, and then of course you revisited your location there, and this is a picture of the the B battery.
The story behind that is amazing. Something like that is a life-changing event. So I remember standing on the pad in front of the BCC, and everybody's running around and screaming and hollering, and I was so calm, and I was looking up at the sky, and I realized that something had happened to me that was going to change my life, and I kind of felt like I knew a secret that nobody else knew, And of course, Dennis was scared to death because the last words that he heard me say, and this is no joke, was, and I said it kind of under my breath. I didn't realize I was still had the headset on. I was still alive. I said, "This is Earth versus the flying saucers for real," And then he lost me. And for all Dennis knew, I just got vaporized. He didn't he didn't know what happened to me. But we were sitting here after we both retired, and it was 35 years after the fact, and for some reason, I just called Dennis up and I said, "Dennis, you know what? I've got to go back." And he says, "I want to go back too." So we got in the car the next day, drove down to B Battery in Key West, which is still there. I knew it was still there. The towers are still there. If you're in Key West, take a ride over there. And I walked out on the pad there where the BCC used to sit and stood there, and I knew that, this really happened. It's amazing, and it was good. And we went back to the location where the 644th was, and something strange happened at that location. And I don't know if it means anything, but I have a GPS system in my car that's been there for quite a while. I used it when I was a PI, and it's never failed me. It's always been good. It was a top of the line system, and when we went to the 644th Squadron, we parked, and for some reason my GPS gave our location as in the Florida Panhandle. I'll never understand that. That's the only time it ever malfunctioned, and it's still on my car. So I don't know what that means. But
you would think that something that would cause that much damage to electrical systems, by using some sort of radiation source of any kind, would probably have a lasting effect on multiple items out there.
Could very well. And I must say I've sat down with a PhD in avionics technician who is a good friend of mine, and we've tried to figure out that ECM, and there's a lot he can't tell me about because he's a government contractor, but we're close to that now. So in 1967 it was science fiction. Nowadays it's probably pretty close. So
now do you want me to pull up the Air Force report? We can probably talk about that.
Yeah. Go ahead and pull up that Air Force, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the first thing here, and the first line says conclusion: aircraft, helicopter. Check.
Yeah, and this is the project card from the Air Force Air Force file, and this is the first card that's always in these files. But what's amazing is right behind us, and I do a lot of research. I've archived probably 200 of these reports, and the Air Intelligence report always follows this card. There's no Air Intelligence report with this report. Mm-hmm. So that, I don't know. It's like I told you earlier, it probably got lost somewhere.
Right.
But the Air Force went to a great deal of trouble to tell everybody, and you go ahead and go to the next slide there.
Oops, sorry, I'm on the wrong one.
No problem.
There you go.
The Air Force went through a great deal of trouble to explain that what all these school children saw and what the guy saw that was disappearing in the sky was Coast Guard helicopters practicing landings and takeoffs. And they probably should have used a little more imagination because as the Air Force, go ahead and go through the report, they spend a lot of time on the old Underwood here trying to debunk all these teachers and go ahead.
Okay.
And
yeah, this is some of the reports, age 10 and 12.
Yeah. We had numerous children. Some of them were screaming in panic, and these are kids. Let me tell you something about Miami 1967. Kids didn't have the internet. They didn't do this. They were outside all the time. They had Homestead Air Force Base there. They had the huge Coast Guard station there. They had the Opelika station there. These kids watched military aircraft all the time. They would not be panicked by a helicopter landing a mile away from there. It just wouldn't have happened. But it was important for them to get this flap under control. This is just page after page of people that they interviewed, and then they later slammed. These are all witnesses. Every one of these sheets has 2 or 3 witnesses on it to the sighting in Opelika at the Crestview School.
Now this is a news release here, right?
Yeah, this is the news release that that Homestead Air Force Base put out that said, "Don't worry, folks." I'm just paraphrasing.
Yeah.
Don't worry, folks. Everything you've seen was just a Coast Guard helicopter, and nothing to see here.
Right.
And of course, in the Air Force file is also just piles of news clippings. The Miami Herald and the Miami News, Miami News was I believe the evening paper at that time. Almost every American city had a morning paper and an evening paper. Neither one of them was going to take that lying down. They all said that it was a whitewash.
Yeah, here's the Miami.
Here's the Miami Herald, 10 chaotic minutes. This is about the 10-minute observation where the kids were screaming and yelling for, kids were scared. These kids would, go ahead.
I was going to say, what did the kids describe to the public?
Yeah, what they described was a bright light. I think, I can't remember if the word disc was used, but a bright light, an object that landed in a field maybe a little less than a mile from the school, and was there for a few minutes and then took off and then stopped in the sky and then disappeared.
Okay.
All helicopters do that.
Sure. Yeah, here's the other half of the Herald front page there. Yeah. Kids screamed. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was clear when I'm going through the archives. This was a big story back then. This.
Air Force says it was a copter. People who saw it say no. So there were some people, discrediting what the Air Force was reporting.
Oh, absolutely. And I believe it was John Berry, this reporter. No, I can't remember. The Air Force won't admit it. You see there in the lower right corner.
Yes.
There's a really neat quote in there. It says, if you see a UFO, don't report it to the Air Force because they're going to tell you it was a copter or this or anything but a UFO. It was really neat.
Now, this was all prior or during Project Blue Book, and
yes.
And it actually about a couple of years prior to it ending. So, was there any involvement from the Project Blue Book people on this?
That card, the original card, is part of the Blue Book file. That index card, but only half the files made it into the Blue Book files. A lot of them we're still archiving documents from the Air Force. But the Miami Herald and the Miami News and everybody else in Miami just wasn't buying their story.
Yeah, and here it is. Children contend Air Force was wrong about the Dade UFO.
Yeah, and for a city like Miami at that time to take on Homestead Air Force Base, that's like Tampa taking on MacDill. Homestead was a major contributor to Dade County as far as dollars, and they had to really be sure of themselves before they took on the Air Force. There was just no defense. If you read these articles, and there's no defense. It's these kids didn't see a helicopter. They needed
Yeah,
to.
it even says here in the article. It says so this John Gramlich,
Yeah, right.
he is a member. He's actually a member of NICAP during that time. It was obviously different people, different set of people running. And he said, the Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, and who said that I am convinced it was a helicopter. So that's interesting. Coming from NICAP, they were NICAP, and I make it's kind of funny too. So, usually NICAP during that time. They were really punctual about finding the witnesses. And were any of your guys ever approached by anybody third party?
No, John, this investigator, and I've read some of what he done, but I still can't find the NICAP file though. NICAP is looking for it for me. He actually went to the scene. He was a student at the University of Miami. He was a NICAP field investigator, and he was from Arlington, West Virginia, I believe, and in pre-med. And he was, this was no crackpot. This was a college senior who was on his way to becoming a doctor. And he actually went up, interviewed the witnesses, and he was convinced that what they saw was not a helicopter.
Okay. So sometimes the newspapers get ahead of themselves.
Yeah.
And then of course the return of the UFO, and this was.
This is the couple weeks later that this gentleman drove out to a Boy Scout camp. He had just picked up his children, his two sons or three sons, and went back to this location where they were having, I believe, some kind of a picnic or something out there. And his daughter ran out to him and said, "They're back." And he got his binoculars and went out there and watched them for quite some time. And this is the gentleman that actually saw them. And it just was amazing. As aircraft approached, they would just disappear. When the aircraft would remain in the area, and then when the aircraft left, they would reappear in almost the same spot. And that's exactly what we were watching on radar. That's exactly what was happening on the radar.
So Bill, in closing, what would you like to get out of this project that you're continuing, obviously, and how can people who may know or who may be witnesses to this event get in contact with you?
Yeah, in addition to my work with MUFON, I started off on this military reporting project where I found out that what had happened to us, Dennis and myself, was not really that unique. It happened to military personnel all over the world, and they'd done the same exact thing. They'd have a sighting, they'd tell them there was nothing to it. 2 weeks or 2 months later, they'd be transferred, they'd be gone, and this is a standard operating procedure. And I started the militaryufo.org, which is an anonymous reporting site for military veterans, just for intelligence purposes. And you can it's .com now. I'm sorry, militaryufo.com, and and also you have MUFON to report to, or you can contact me direct, MUFONman@gmail.com. That's easy to remember.
Yeah, there you
go. And you don't need to give me anything. I just want to know about those military witnesses, and we're trying to build a story here. There's hundreds of veterans out there that I know have tracked, and I get reports every day, and they're all amazing. It's amazing, and I love it.
Yeah, it's nothing. I always tell myself that there's nothing I'd change about it, no matter how stressed out I get. I don't think I'd ever give it up. But yeah, so that's great, Bill, and I really appreciate you sharing your witness event. Giving the people the need to know, because people do need to know about this phenomenon, and they need to know the facts about the phenomenon. Push aside the sensationalism, and nothing wrong with people writing books or being authors, but push aside all the people who claim to be experts. Listen to what the actual witnesses have seen, especially the trained witnesses, the witnesses that have been in the military or in the inside of these situations, and you really get a sense of realism with this phenomenon.
Yeah, it would have been very easy for me to say that's what happened to me and believe it. Yeah. I didn't even do that with my own incident. I went out and found witnesses because that's what we need. We need more people talking, and then as more and more people came forward and more facts were uncovered, it's amazing. And then the picture began to clear up, that it wasn't just a one-night incident. That was a month in South Florida, and maybe a month for the entire United States of America.
Yeah, exactly. We often find that out, that there are incidences completely associated with one another, and then we find out that they've spanned it months, if not sometimes, longer than that, even in some cases. So, yeah, and so people at home, most of the information you're going to find down in the description below. If you're watching the pre-recorded or the recorded version on our YouTube channel. Again, always remember that the Need to Know will be putting out more and more witnesses as we get more coming forward. We do have actually a few in our archive right now that I'm going to be putting together in the next few months. Some really interesting witnesses, Air Force pilots, World War II veterans that have seen things during that time, Korean War veterans. So there's a lot to cover with this segment, and again, you can always check us out on our Facebook, which is just the Florida MUFON Facebook page, or go to our Meetup page, which is meetup.com / I think it's like let me get it right because Terry will kill me. But I always get the URL mixed up. But again, all of our information you can find on our website at www.mufon.com, or locally for MUFON Florida, you can go to or Florida MUFON. You can go to www.floridamufon.org, and you can get a lot of the information about where to find us and how to get involved. And that meetup URL I'm about to find out here for you guys, because I always get it wrong, is www.meetup.com /Florida-MUFON /. And you can go there and get involved in all the local meetings, get to know us. And if you want to become a field investigator, we're really looking for people that are willing to help out. And people like Bill and his cousin and everybody associated with this. We're really working hard at this, and we hope that you guys can start stepping forward that want to get involved, or come and share your stories and tell us what happened. So, until next time, guys, the Need to Know with Bill Schroeder. Glad to have you. Thanks a lot, Bill, for coming.
Oh, thanks. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, and so you people at home know that we're going to be doing more of these. There's other segments as well. You're going to get some case profiles from our own field investigators soon. So we've got about 5 or 6 of those lined up, where they're going to be telling you exactly how the investigation went and exactly the facts involved in those investigations, including some trace evidence cases. So it'll be really interesting. And again, Need to Know is going to continue some more. So until next time, guys, I'll see you later.